Singapore has become one of the most attractive destinations for high and ultra high net worth individuals to move, to educate their children, and to store their wealth. But moving to Singapore just became a lot more expensive. So Singapore has long had a program called the Global Investor Program, the GIP, and it was always more expensive than comparable European programs, perhaps because Singapore, while having a much more difficult path to citizenship than many European countries, also has much lower taxes and a more straightforward tax system than those European countries. Has great weather, has innovation, has civil harmony. And so the program required people to live in Singapore a substantial part of the time. But it wasn't as expensive as it is now. Singapore has just quadrupled the price to participate in the Global Investor Program, and I'm going to share with you what it is that you need to know. I'm Andrew Henderson. Here at Nomad Capitalist, we help high and ultra high net worth individuals and high earners diversify themselves, their freedom, their wealth, all around the world by creating plans to be global citizens and make sure that they're always in the driver's seat. And so Singapore's Economic Development Board has announced, and this just took effect recently, that they're going to raise the requirements to one of three things to participate in the GAP. Number one, you can start a business. You've got to put in 10 million Singapore dollars. That's about 75 cents of the dollar to the US dollar. So 7.5 million US dollars, 10 million Singapore dollars into a business. You're also going to need to have 30 employees, and at least 10 of those need to be new employees. If you already had a business, you need to bring in some new people. Shouldn't be an issue if you're starting out, but 10 million into a business, and you've got to create a good amount of employment. The second option is going to be 25 million Singapore dollars. So now we're in the upper teens US dollars into an approved fund. They've got approved GAP investment funds. You're investing in Singapore. Or you've got to bring a family office with 200 million Singapore dollars, and at least 50 of that needs to be put into various Singaporean private equity or equities or other financial instruments. Now, the cool thing about Singapore, no capital gains tax, no dividend tax, very straightforward. And so for people who just want to invest in Singapore, we've talked about how Singaporean bank stocks, for example, if you have your personal tax situation figured out, like you live in Dubai or you live somewhere else that doesn't tax your foreign income, you've got a pretty clean setup for earning a little bit higher yield and not having the tax obligations you would have in many Western countries. But we're talking about you moving to Singapore, and basically the numbers have just gone up dramatically. Now, a lot of ultra high net worth individuals that we've worked with over the years avoided the GAP because what you're going to get is a 5-year permit to live in Singapore. And generally the idea is you're going to be spending at least half your time there if you ever want that to be renewed. On top of that, there is the issue that as a permanent resident of Singapore, which you get to basically jump to that permanent resident status rather than being a temporary resident, your male children will be eligible, even if not citizens, to participate in national service. Citizenship has become rather difficult. Nobody knows exactly what the numbers are, but they do seem to reject a lot of people who apply for citizenship, the same as they are rejecting a lot of folks who come as temporary residents, let's say on an employment pass, and then want to become permanent residents. So the permanence there is not as much as you might find in some, for example, European countries. This is not a plan B by any measure. This is something where you need to live in Singapore. It needs to be the center of your life. That can be favorable for tax, but you're also going to be committing now a very substantial amount of money to live there. And so even before these policies came into place, Singapore brought in about 180 people in the last couple of years. I imagine those numbers will go lower, which is something that, given how Singapore is doing so well, given how strong it is, given how conservative many of the institutions there are, they're not looking to be open for everybody. They don't need to be a plan B. They want to be a plan A. And so you're going to probably see just a very small number of people every year getting into this program, and not all of them will be renewed after 5 years because they may not do what it takes to stay there. But Singapore has said, listen, we're looking for top tier business owners. We're looking for serious investors. And so basically you're going to start a big business. You're going to commit to hiring a lot of people, dozens of people, most of them being Singaporean citizens. You're going to be paying decent wages, I think reasonable, but decent wages. Or you're going to be investing a lot of money into funds, or you're going to be moving a big family office to Singapore. This is a serious commitment. Now, for folks who like the idea of living in Singapore, but who don't like the drawbacks, they don't necessarily want to spend all their time in one country, especially considering Singapore is relatively small. A lot of people in Singapore, you might want to go up to Malaysia for a holiday, or go to Thailand and the islands, or go somewhere else in Asia. I mean, to me, one of the great things about living in Asia is it's so easy to get around so many not only beautiful places, but up and coming places where there are a lot of opportunities. If you've got to stay the majority of the time in Singapore, every day that you're somewhere else is going to count against you. That's a downside. Again, the national service, the citizenship being difficult, and even if you get dual citizenship, you're not allowed to have dual citizenship. So, if those things, along with the new increased prices, turn you off, there are other alternatives around Asia. Next door, Malaysia. Certainly the level of development isn't quite as high, but you've got, I would argue, in Kuala Lumpur and in parts of Penang, very similar levels of English in many places. You've got much, much, much lower prices, particularly on the real estate side. And you've got a number of different, comparatively much cheaper, investment residence permit programs that also aren't going to lead to citizenship. There's not even any hope of it. But perhaps a very favorable comparison. I've spent 10 years off and on in Malaysia and recommend it. You've got Thailand, which has made a big push from various visas courting digital nomads, to the Thai Elite program where you pay a fee for access, to the investor program where you just park your money in the bank or in Thai equities, and you can live there basically permanently. Both countries offer similar versions of what Singapore offers, offer similar tax advantages where you can pay very low levels of tax. They're not going to get you to be a citizen. Certainly Malaysia's passport is good, but not quite as good as Singapore's. Thailand's is not that great. But you're relatively on par, where you're giving up a little bit of lifestyle, a little bit of efficiency, but you're not investing 10, 25, or 200 million Singapore dollars. Even Hong Kong is coming back on people's radar. I've met with a number of expats in the last 6 months who are saying as China and Hong Kong reopen, they're looking forward to going back. And you can start a company in Hong Kong and you could put in much less money and far fewer employees and still have very favorable taxes comparable to what you'd pay in Singapore. And you could live in Hong Kong if that's something that you want. Another place, if you want the same level of development without the Southeast Asia weather, is South Korea, which has its own residence by investment program, whether it's by real estate. They've got other ways to qualify. It's often overlooked. There is citizenship. It is perhaps even more complicated than Singapore's in that you need to learn Korean and that there is no dual citizenship. But as we've always told you, Asia is not a place where you go, generally speaking, to get citizenship. It's a place where you go to have residence. And so if you want to live in Asia and you're not happy with the current passport you have, I would encourage you to get a citizenship somewhere else. I wouldn't be moving to Asia and trying to get citizenship. I would be a foreigner living in Asia. And so the citizenship piece doesn't turn me off. But putting $10 or $25 million is definitely an issue. And by the way, Singapore companies, while they don't tax the money that you may make overseas, a business that's in Singapore is going to pay Singapore tax. It's in the teens, it's reasonable, it's a very straightforward system, but it's not going to be like running a business in a UAE free zone, for example, in Dubai. You're going to pay something. And so on top of the money you're putting in, you might already be putting that into a business. You might say, hey, I'm putting 10 million in, I'm hiring people. What does it matter? I'll go to Singapore. There is going to be the tax concern. And so is Singapore worth that versus, let's say, a UAE, where they are rolling out the red carpet and finding more ways to give people golden visas and more ways to give people residence permits. So I think for people who want to be in Southeast Asia, from a lifestyle perspective, Malaysia, Thailand, et cetera, you're probably not going to meet as many people in the business ecosystem. But you can have a great life. You can have all the other benefits at much, much, much lower price. Hong Kong, for a certain kind of person who finds that to be okay. South Korea could be an interesting, more of a plan B. You don't have to spend all your time in South Korea. I think that residence program is dramatically underrated. I think more people should take advantage of that. And I think that Dubai, for example, for a certain type of person, it is a different vibe than Singapore. Singapore is certainly more understated compared to Dubai, but they're making it much easier to go to the UAE. And so I understand why Singapore is doing what it's doing. They have plenty of people. They want only the creme de la creme. And it's a big commitment. in money, in time, in not being sure what may come at the end of it. And so I think that definitely there's other places in Southeast Asia, Dubai, even some places in Europe, like in Ireland or Switzerland, maybe less for running the business from there, but for living could be equal. And they're going to offer you to get in with a much lower commitment as well. And so Singapore definitely for a lot of people now is off limits.